Every ending is a beautiful neon requiem, a glowing tribute to the path we've walked and the lessons we've learned. Join us as we close this chapter and prepare for the next big reveal. Hit subscribe now and witness the beauty of a perfect resolution.
My stepbrother was still signing his name when the lawyer looked at me across the table and asked if I wanted to say anything. I said no. I had a coffee in front of me, still warm. I picked it up and took a slow sip and watched him finish writing his signature with this little flourish at the end, the way he always did. Like even his handwriting was performing for an audience. His wife squeezed his arm. My father clapped once, a single proud clap, and said, "That's it. That's done." I set my cup down. Nobody looked at me. That was fine. I should back up. Because if I start there, you're going to think my father was a villain. He wasn't. That's actually the part that took me the longest to work through. The fact that he's not a bad man. He just had a very specific idea of how the world was supposed to work, and that idea had been handed to him by his own father, who had it handed down from his, and nobody in that line ever stopped to question it. You hand things to the son. That's just the shape of it. That's just how things go. My mother died when I was 9. My father remarried when I was 14. My stepmother was not cruel to me. She was just very focused on her own son. My stepbrother, who was 17 when she moved in and who had, in the years since, become my father's idea of a success story. He worked at my father's company. He had the corner office on the 3rd floor. He took clients to dinner and charged it to the company card and called it relationship management, which it was, I suppose, in the loosest possible sense of the phrase. His name is not important. I'll call him what I always called him in my head, which is just my stepbrother, because giving him more than that feels like more than he earned. My father's company is a mid-size commercial real estate development firm, nothing glamorous. They acquire properties, negotiate leases, manage a portfolio of office buildings and small retail centers across 3 states. When my father started it in the early 90s, it was just him and one assistant and a lot of cold calls. By the time I joined after college, it had 42 employees, a decent reputation, and a specific problem that nobody wanted to name out loud. My stepbrother was running deals he didn't understand. I don't mean that as an insult, exactly. He's not stupid. He's charming. He can read a room. He can make a client feel like the most important person in the building, which matters in this industry more than people think. But the actual structural work, the lease analysis, the zoning research, the financial modeling, that wasn't him. That was whoever he'd managed to pull into his orbit that week and quietly hand the real work off to. For the first 2 years, that person was me. I had come in as an analyst. My father gave me a desk near the copy room and a stack of due diligence files and said, essentially, figure it out. So I did. I taught myself the financial modeling software over a long weekend. I started catching errors in the lease abstracts that the outside firm had been missing for years. I flagged a zoning issue on a property in Ohio that would have cost us somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 to untangle if we closed on it. My father told me I had good instincts. My stepbrother asked if I could pull together a summary for his Thursday client meeting. I pulled together the summary. I did it again the following Thursday, and the one after that. I stopped being an analyst and became, unofficially, the person who made my stepbrother look prepared. I don't know exactly when I realized it wasn't going to change. Maybe when my father promoted my stepbrother to VP of Acquisitions and gave me a modest raise and a title adjustment that meant nothing. Maybe when my stepbrother expensed a 4-day golf trip to Scottsdale as client development, and I reviewed the invoices as part of a routine audit and saw that the clients he listed hadn't attended. 2 of them didn't even have active deals with us at the time. I brought it to my father quietly. I showed him the invoices. I showed him the client list. I did not editorialize, I just laid it out. My father looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "He's building relationships. That's how this business works." I said, "2 of these people weren't even clients yet." He said, "Not yet." I left his office and I went back to my desk and I stared at the wall for probably 4 minutes straight. Then I opened my laptop and got back to work, because what else was I going to do? That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived inside a situation like that. It's not dramatic. It doesn't feel like a turning point when you're in it. It just feels like Tuesday. You go home, you heat something up. You tell yourself it'll shift eventually, that the work will speak for itself, that fairness is slow, but it arrives. I believed that for longer than I should have. 3 years in, my father had a health scare. Nothing catastrophic. His cardiologist called it a warning event and recommended he reduce his stress load significantly. My father was 63 and had spent 40 years building something and was not naturally inclined to step back from it, but the warning rattled him in a way I hadn't seen before. He started talking about succession. He started talking about what the company would look like without him running it day to day. He and I had dinner alone one night, just the two of us, at the Italian place he'd been going to since the 90s. He had the same thing he always ordered. We talked about the company for most of it, and there was a moment, I remember it clearly, where he reached across the table and covered my hand with his and said he was proud of what I'd built. Not what the company had built, what I had built. He used those words specifically. I held on to that. I probably held on to it too tightly, because 6 months later, he called a meeting. My stepbrother was there. My stepmother was there, which was unusual. She'd never been involved in the business side. The company's attorney was there, a woman named Ms. Niside Okafor, who had handled their legal work for years and who had always been careful to treat me exactly the same as everyone else in the room, which I appreciated more than she knew. My father explained that he had been thinking carefully about the future of the company. He talked about legacy. He talked about continuity. He used the phrase keeping it in the family 3 times in about 4 minutes, and each time he said it, I watched my stepbrother sit a little straighter. Then my father said he had decided to transfer operational control to my stepbrother. Majority stake, signing authority, the whole thing. My stepmother made a sound that was almost a laugh, this small, bright, triumphant exhale. I sat very still. My stepbrother looked at me for just a second, the way you look at someone when you're checking to see how much damage you've done, and then he looked away. My father did not look at me at all. Ms. Okafor looked at me, and I saw something cross her face. Not surprise, exactly. More like a kind of careful attention. Like she was watching to see what I would do. What I did was nothing. I said I needed some air. I walked out of the conference room and down the hall and out through the side door into the parking structure. I stood next to my car for about 10 minutes. I didn't cry. I thought about my mother, which I don't usually let myself do at work, and I thought about the zoning issue in Ohio, and I thought about the golf trip, and I thought about my father's hand over mine at the Italian restaurant and the word built. Then I went back inside. I need to explain something here because this is the part people don't understand unless I walk them through it. 4 years earlier, before my father's health scare, before the succession conversations, back when I still believed it would shift on its own, I had started buying shares. The company had been incorporated in a way that allowed for private share issuance, and over the years, as cash was needed for various projects, small tranches of equity had been sold to outside investors. Most of those investors were quiet partners with no real interest in operations. 2 of them, over time, became interested in selling. They were older. They had other priorities. They wanted liquidity. I bought the first tranche with money I had saved over 3 years of living well below my means. I had a good salary and no expensive habits, and a studio apartment that cost less than I could have afforded. I paid for the shares myself, in cash, after consulting with a personal attorney, not the company's attorney, and structuring the transaction carefully and quietly. The second tranche I bought 18 months later. Combined, those 2 purchases gave me just over 26% of outstanding shares. Then the company's founding attorney, a man who had worked with my father since the beginning and who had retired 2 years prior, reached out to me privately. He had retained a small equity stake as part of his original compensation arrangement. He was 81 years old. He wanted to simplify his estate. He offered me right of first refusal. I bought his shares too. I did the math one evening at my kitchen table, and then I sat there for a while not quite believing the number I'd arrived at. 51%. I had not told my father. I had not told anyone at the company. The transactions were all properly recorded with the state, all filed correctly, all entirely legal. There was nothing secret about them in a legal sense. I had simply not announced them. Nobody had asked. My father, for all his business instincts, had never been meticulous about the cap table. He trusted the attorney's office to track that, and they did track it accurately, but my father hadn't reviewed it in years. I thought about telling him a dozen times. After the Italian restaurant dinner, especially, I came close. I had the conversation mostly drafted in my head. But then I thought about the golf trip. I thought about the title adjustment that meant nothing. I thought about building relationships, and I put the conversation away. After the meeting where he announced the transfer, I went home and I called my personal attorney. I told her what had happened. She already knew about the shares, obviously. She'd handled the purchases. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Do you want me to reach out to Ms. Purchases?" Okafor? I said yes. What happened next took about 3 weeks of paperwork and a fairly tense series of emails between the two attorneys. I was not present for most of it. I went to work every day. I reviewed lease abstracts. I flagged 2 more issues in a portfolio acquisition my stepbrother was technically leading. I said good morning to people in the hallway. I ate my lunch at my desk. My stepbrother did not act like anything was wrong because as far as he knew, nothing was. He was, by all appearances, the incoming majority owner of a 42-person company. He started referring to himself as CEO in casual conversation, which he was not yet authorized to do, but nobody corrected him because nobody knew to. The signing was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. There were 6 people in the conference room. My father, my stepbrother, his wife who had come specifically for the occasion, Ms. Okafor, my father's longtime office manager who had been with the company for 20 years and who I think suspected something was coming because she kept glancing at me sideways. And me. My stepbrother was in a good suit. His wife was wearing something she'd clearly bought for the occasion. My father looked like a man completing something he'd been carrying for a long time. The documents were placed in front of my stepbrother. Ms. Okafor walked through them page by page, the way she always did, thorough and unhurried, not telegraphing anything. My stepbrother signed. His wife squeezed his arm. My father made his single proud clap. Ms. Okafor let a beat pass. Then she placed a second set of documents on the table and said, in exactly the same calm professional tone she'd used for everything else, "Before we finalize the record, there's one item we need to address. As of the current share registry, these transfer documents cannot take effect as written." My stepbrother looked up. Ms. Okafor looked at me. She said, "Would you like to explain or would you prefer I walk through it?" I said, "Go ahead." She walked through it, clearly and without drama. The first tranche, the second tranche, the founder's attorney's shares, the math, the date of final acquisition, the percentage. The room was very quiet. My father said, "What?" Miss Father said, Okafor said, "Your daughter has held majority ownership of this company for approximately 2.5 years. My stepbrother's wife made a sound. I won't try to describe it. My stepbrother sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he looked at me. I expected anger. I had prepared myself for anger. What I got instead was something more complicated, a kind of exhausted recognition, like he had always known on some level that this was a thing that could happen and had spent years hoping it wouldn't. He said, "When?" I told him. He nodded once, slowly. Then he uncapped his pen and signed the revised document that transferred his own recently inked stake back to a neutral holding position pending legal review. He did it without being asked. I thought that was, genuinely, the most graceful thing I'd ever seen him do. My father didn't say anything for a long time. His office manager quietly excused herself from the room. My stepbrother's wife picked up her bag and left, and I heard her heels in the hallway for a long time after the door closed. My stepbrother stood up. He said, "I'll clean out my office." I said, "You don't have to do that today." He said, "I think I do." He left. It was just me and my father and Ms. Okafor. My father looked at me the way someone looks at a place they used to know, like he was doing a kind of slow reconciliation between a memory and whatever was in front of him. He said, "You didn't tell me." I said, "You didn't tell me." I said, "Why?" I thought about what to say. I thought about the golf trip again. I thought about the title adjustment. I thought about the meeting he called and the word legacy and the way he'd never once looked at me when he said it. I thought about the dinner at the Italian restaurant, his hand over mine, the word built. I said, "I wanted to know whether you'd give it to him even if the company wasn't yours to give." He closed his eyes. I didn't say it to hurt him. I said it because it was the truest answer I had, and I had spent enough years giving him answers that were easier than true. We sat there for a while. Ms. Okafor had stepped out at some point, quietly, the way she did everything. Outside the windows, the parking lot was the same parking lot it had always been. Someone was backing out of a space in the far row. My father said, "I didn't know how much you'd done." I said, "I know." He said, "I should have." And then he stopped. I waited. He said, "I should have been paying better attention." I said, "Yes." That was it. That was the whole conversation, more or less. There wasn't a big scene. There wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There was just a very tired 63-year-old man sitting across from his daughter in a conference room while the sun came through the window at a low afternoon angle, and neither of us pretending that the last several years had been something other than what they were. He asked me what I was going to do. I told him I was going to run the company, that I had some structural changes in mind, that I'd be bringing in a new VP of acquisitions, someone from outside, and reorganizing the division in a way that I believed would be better for the portfolio long term. I told him I hoped he would stay on in an advisory capacity if he wanted to. I was not being sarcastic, I meant it. His industry relationships were real. His institutional knowledge of the portfolio was real. I was not interested in burning things down. I was interested in running them well. He said he would think about it. My stepbrother did clean out his office that day. He sent me a text that evening, just his cell number, in case I ever needed to reach him about the legal handover details. No anger. No recriminations. I saved the number. I haven't used it yet, but I kept it. My father came back to the office the following Monday. We had coffee in his old office, which is technically now mine, and he told me about 3 active deals he was tracking and 1 broker relationship he thought I should know about. It was a good meeting. It was the first meeting I'd had with him in a long time where I felt like he was actually talking to me. I don't know what we are to each other now, exactly. I don't think there's a word for it. We are not repaired, but we are not finished either. He is my father. I am his daughter. I own the company he built. Those are the facts, and I am still learning to hold all of them at the same time. The office manager knocked on my door that afternoon to ask about a supply order. She had worked here for 20 years. She knew this building better than anyone. I told her to come in, and I asked her what she thought we needed. She pulled up a chair and told me. I wrote it down. In the morning, I had a company to run. The thing I keep coming back to is how ordinary all of it felt. Not the signing, not the reveal. I mean the years before any of that. The Tuesday mornings, the lease abstracts, the audit that turned up a golf trip nobody was ever going to answer for. That's where the real story lived, in all those ordinary moments where I had to decide, over and over again, what kind of person I was going to be inside a situation that kept telling me it didn't matter. I think about my stepbrother signing his name with that little flourish, and I don't feel what people expect me to feel. I don't feel triumphant exactly. What I feel is something closer to tired and clear at the same time. Because what happened in that conference room wasn't really about shares or percentages or legal documents. It was about the fact that I had spent years doing the actual work, and I had done it honestly, and I had kept my own book straight even when nobody was checking. That's the part that mattered, not the outcome, the conduct. The way I handled the audit instead of burying it. The way I bought those shares through proper channels, with a personal attorney, everything filed correctly, nothing hidden. I wasn't trying to set a trap. I was trying to build something real. The trap only existed because my father had never looked closely enough to see what was already there. I've talked to people since who asked me why I didn't just fight it. Why I didn't walk into my father's office after that meeting and lay everything out and demand to be seen. And the honest answer is that I had already done a version of that. I had shown him the invoices. I had shown him the numbers. He had looked at the evidence I put in front of him and chosen a different interpretation. You can't argue someone into seeing you. You can only make sure that when the moment comes, you've built something that speaks for itself. That's what I was doing all those years, not waiting. Building. There's a difference, and it took me a while to understand it myself. My father asked me, at the end, why I hadn't told him about the shares. I told him the truth. I wanted to know whether he'd give the company away even if it wasn't his to give. That answer came from a place I'm not entirely proud of. There was something in me that needed to know, needed the proof, and I got it. But I also think about whether I could have handled it with more grace, whether I could have been both strong and open at the same time, instead of choosing strength in a way that required silence. I don't have a clean answer to that. I'm still figuring it out. What I know is this: the work was real. The preparation was real. And when the room went quiet and Miss Okafor set down her pen, none of it was luck. It was years of showing up and thinking clearly and refusing to let bitterness make me sloppy. You can be wronged and still be rigorous. You can be overlooked and still be meticulous. Those things don't cancel each other out. The office manager knocked on my door that same afternoon and asked about a supply order, and I told her to pull up a chair. 20 years of institutional knowledge sitting across from me, and I had the good sense to write it down. That felt like the beginning of something. I'm still in it,